Hi and welcome to my Leftovers channel. I would love to promise you some nice, quiet Christmas time reading, but who am I kidding? Tonight we are checking out Goosebumps, so be sure to prepare yourself for some thrills, chills and scares. And if you don't have too many nightmares, I dare you to hit that subscribe button to be notified of new updates and episodes. So I really hope you enjoy this story, and I will see you guys on the flip side. Cheers.
Nutcracker Nightmare. This must be a bad dream, I moaned. My mum turned around and gave me a dirty look from the front seat of the car. That's enough, Samantha, she snapped. I hate when she calls me by my whole name. I waited until she turned around and made a face at the back of her head. My father glanced into the rearview mirror and caught me. Sam, he said, we're not dragging you off to be tortured, you know. We're taking you to an exciting cultural event. My dad is a college art professor. That means he's big on culture. I hope you'll be polite and thank Mrs. Boren for the ticket, Sam. My mum flipped down the visor to check her wavy brown hair in the mirror. Mrs. Boren, or Old Boring as I call her, used to be my babysitter. She moved out of our neighbourhood when I was 8. But I still remembered every horrible second I spent with her. She never let me do anything fun, and now 4 years later, she had found a new way to torture me. She was taking my family to the ballet for Christmas. I'm sure Old Boring will love this stupid dress you made me wear. I pushed down at the sleeves of this hideous green taffeta dress, a hand-me-down from my oldest cousin. It was at least 2 sizes too big, with disgusting lacy bows on the shoulders. No name-calling, Samantha, my mum said sharply. I loved the Nutcracker when I was your age, she added. I couldn't help being grumpy. All my friends were going to the movies tonight, and I was missing it. I glanced at my wrist and realised I'd left my watch home. Just as well, I thought. I won't be able to count every endless second of the ballet boredom. I spotted Mrs. Boren as soon as we entered the lobby. She hadn't changed a bit. She was tall and chunky, with short black hair that seemed to be painted onto her head. Her clothes were dull black, her skin dull white. Only her huge grey eyes stood out. They seemed to see everything about you, even what you were thinking. Good evening, Samantha. I'm glad that you came, she said. Yeah, I mumbled. I wanted to be polite, but Old Boring's steely gaze was making me nervous. My mum flashed me another dirty look. She and my dad chatted about Old Boring as we walked through the lobby and into the theatre. I trailed behind them. I took my seat on the aisle next to my mum. A tall woman was sitting in front of me. At first I thought she was wearing a big fur hat, then I realised it was her hair. I wouldn't be able to see a thing without leaning way out over the aisle. Great, I murmured. Just my luck. Mum looked at me, then at the woman's tall, fuzzy hairdo. Don't worry, Sam, she said. I'm sure your father will switch seats with you. Dad and Mrs. Boren turned to me. Sure thing, Sam, Dad said, starting to get up. I shuddered at the thought of sitting next to Old Boring. Forget it, I said hastily. I'll stay here. At least dodging around for a view will give me something to do. It might even keep me awake. I was sorry as soon as the words were out. My father frowned. My mother gasped. I glanced at Mrs. Boren, but she didn't seem upset at all. The girl hasn't learned to appreciate the ballet, she told my parents, but she's young. These things take time. Lots and lots of time. Mum looked ready to launch into another round of scolding. I didn't wait around for it. I'm going to the ladies' room, I said quickly, and I'll be right back. There were several women in line, but by the time I came out, the theatre lobby was empty. Almost empty, that is. Hello, Samantha. Mrs. Boren was standing in the doorway. My name is Sam, I corrected her. She didn't answer, and that made me nervous. We'd better get going, I said. The show must be about to start. Her cold, grey eyes stared at me. I started to go into the theatre. That means it's almost time to be bored to death, I muttered. Bored to death, Mrs. Boren repeated, her eyes narrowing. I wonder if you know what boredom really is. I could feel my face turning red. I hadn't meant for her to hear that. I don't know, I mumbled. It's time for you to learn some patience, Samantha. Mrs. Boren lifted her wrist and her sleeve fell back, revealing a strangely carved gold wristwatch. Oh yes, it's time. She slowly tapped the watch 3 times with her right pointer finger. Then she turned and walked away without another word. I returned to my seat just as the orchestra started to tune up. "There you are," my mum said. "You were gone a long time." "There was a line," I said. I didn't dare look at Mrs. Boren, who was back in her seat. All I wanted was to forget that freaky scene in the lobby. My mind wandered to all the fun my friends were having without me, but that was too depressing. So I started thinking about the computer game my parents had given me for Christmas. It was really complicated. So far, I'd never made it past level 6. I thought about all the strategies I'd tried so far. Then I tried to figure out what I was doing wrong. Maybe coming to the ballet hadn't been such a total loss after all. It gave me plenty of time to think. I heard a tuba blare out for a few notes, then a flute played a scale. "What's going on?" I whispered to my mum. "They're warming up," she replied. "Still?" I said in surprise. "They sure are taking a long time." Mum rolled her eyes. "Be patient," she said. "The ballet will be starting soon." The minutes crept by, one by one by one. The musicians continued tooting and trilling. After a while, my arm started to tingle. It had fallen asleep. I shook it out. "Sam," Mum said sharply, "sit still." "Is this thing ever going to start?" I asked. My mind drifted again. This time I couldn't help thinking about my friends. I wondered if they would go out for pizza after the movie. I wished I was with them. I even knew what I would have worn. The new rugby shirt my cousins gave me for Christmas. That reminded me of my other gifts. To keep myself occupied, I decided to list them all out in my head. The orchestra went silent. It's about time, I thought. I waited for the music to start, but several minutes passed in silence. "What's happening?" I whispered finally. "Shh!" My mum's eyes were turned to the stage. She was smiling expectantly. I leaned over to get a view past the hairdo, but the curtain stayed down. Finally, after what seemed like at least 10 minutes, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I gazed towards the orchestra pit and saw the conductor lift his arms. The musicians slowly raised their instruments. Still nothing happened. The conductor kept his arms raised. The orchestra kept their instruments ready, but nobody played a note. What is going on? I glanced around and saw the rest of the audience stared at the stage without moving. I shifted in my seat, trying to get comfortable. Why hadn't the stupid ballet started yet? The silence was eerie. No one shuffled in their seats, coughed or whispered, and my mum was still staring at the stage with that little smile on her face. When the first note finally came, it startled me so much that my foot jerked forward and banged into the seat in front of me. The hairdo woman turned around and scowled. The orchestra introduction was boring, so I stopped paying attention. Instead, I thought about the poem I was supposed to memorize for school. I knew most of it, but it was really long. 20 stanzas. Reciting the poem in my head was actually sort of relaxing. But by the 5th time, I was definitely sick of it. I peered around the hair in front of me. The music was still going, but the curtain was closed. Hooray, I thought. I must have dozed off and missed the entire ballet. It seemed too good to be true. "Is it ending?" I whispered. "Very funny," my mum replied. "The dancing is going to start any minute now." At first, I thought she was teasing me, but I turned to the stage again and saw that the curtain was rising. It inched its way up. Several dancers were on stage, poised to begin. How did I lose track of time like that? I stifled a huge yawn. What time was it, anyway? I tried to see my mum's watch, but it was turned away from me. On stage, the dancers were moving slowly in their colourful tutus. They twirled around the stage so slowly as if in slow motion. As they danced on and on, my left foot fell asleep. It felt as if pins and needles were being thrust right through my shoe. I stamped my foot hard, trying to get my circulation going. That brought my mum out of her trance. "Quiet," she whispered. "But my foot's asleep," I protested. I turned back to the stage. The dancers had left. The musicians were shuffling pages as they got ready for the next scene. When it finally started, I gripped the arms of my seat and pretended that everything was normal. But the dance went on and on. It was taking forever. I glanced over at my mum. She was smiling and humming under her breath as she watched the dancers moving so slowly across the stage. So slowly, they barely moved. Something was wrong here, and I seemed to be the only one who knew it. But what could I do? I closed my eyes and tried to think. Suddenly, the audience started to clap. That woke me from my thoughts. I joined in. The applause went on and on. After several minutes, I stopped clapping, but at a frown from my mum, I started again. 10 minutes later, my hands were getting sore. I clapped as softly as I could. Just when I was afraid my hands would start bleeding if I clapped any longer, the applause ended. And another long pause came. The only sound was the musicians shuffling their scores. The creepy silence lasted even longer this time. The audience sat still and waited. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Mum," I whispered, my throat felt dry and scratchy. "What time is it?" She sighed. "Honestly, Sam," she whispered back, "if you can't enjoy yourself, keep quiet so the rest of us can." Mrs. Boren leaned forward so I could see her. "I know what time it is, Sam," she said. She held up her wrist with the strange watch on it. "It's time for you to learn some patience," she said. She tapped the watch. My mother smiled. She didn't realize what Mrs. Boren was saying, but I did. Mrs. Boren was responsible for this. She had cast some sort of spell over everyone to slow everything down. And now, hours and hours were passing as we sat here. I had to do something. Who knew how long she was planning to keep us trapped in this weird time warp? I tried to move. For a second, my limbs wouldn't obey. Finally, they creaked to life, feeling stiff and cramped. "Mum," I whispered urgently, "listen, something strange is going on here." She didn't let me finish. "This is your last warning, Samantha," she whispered angrily. "One more word before this ballet is over and you're grounded until next Christmas." But I hardly heard her. I had just taken a good look at her. I gasped in horror. It was dark in the theatre, but there was no mistaking it. My mother's brown hair was streaked with patches of grey. How long had we been sitting here? I had to escape. Maybe once I was outside I could figure out how to save my family. I stood and walked towards the exit, willing my rubbery legs to hurry. Why hadn't I done this earlier? Soon I would be outside in the fresh air. I would head straight for the police. Maybe they could save my parents and the rest of the audience from the old woman's curse before it was too late. But the exit didn't appear any closer. I sped up, breaking from a jog into a run. I ran until I was gasping for air and there was a stitch in my side, but no matter how fast my legs pumped, the lobby doors stayed where they were. When I turned around, my seat was only a few feet behind me. With a defeated sigh, I walked back and collapsed into my chair. Mrs. Boren leaned forward. "If you want to go to the snack bar, Samantha, it's closed while the performance is going on," she said sweetly. "You'll just have to be patient." I glared at her, but I was too tired and scared to answer. Suddenly, I heard a loud rip. One of the seams of my dress had come apart. I stared down in surprise. My sleeves were too short. I had grown into and out of my cousin's dress while I was sitting here. How long had it been? How long? Finally, the curtain came down. I sobbed out loud. I was so relieved. Yes, now I could leave this nightmare ballet with my parents. I started to stand up. Mrs. Boren leaned forward again and smiled at me. "Be patient, Samantha," she said. "The first act is almost over. The second act will start again real soon." The second act will start really soon.
Hi, I am so glad you made it to the end of the story. Congratulations! If you would like to hear about any new stories or any new videos from the Leftovers channel, be sure to subscribe and hit that little bell icon just so we can keep bugging you. We have a distinctly 90s flavour here. We look at video games, toys, books, Lego sets, and we do have a lot of fun, so I'd love for you guys to come back. So stay tuned for some more leftover culture. Thank you for watching.